The best way to read the Navamsha or any zodiacal Vedic subchart is a very little known secret that I will reveal right now in clear detail. This will begin a series of videos in which I'll illustrate how important this technique can be using practical examples of well-known people. In this installment, we will be looking at the horrific serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. Before we start to look at his chart though, let me first introduce you to the technique itself. So this here is my Navamsha. Now if you don't know what a Navamsha is, that's not a problem. I recently put out a video explaining all about that. There should be a link to it somewhere on the screen now, or I'll put a link in the description below. And to illustrate how this technique works, let's just take a closer look at this Ketu. So the chart is saying that this Ketu is in the Capricorn Navamsha. The reason why it's in the Capricorn Navamsha is in the real chart itself, the main chart itself. Now here in my main chart, you can see that Ketu is at 3 degrees and 10 minutes of Virgo. Now the first 3 degrees and 20 minutes of Virgo are the Capricorn section in the Navamsha. And so since Ketu is in the Capricorn section of Virgo, when you go to the Navamsha chart, Ketu winds up in Capricorn. Again, if you want a slower explanation of this, that's all in that Navamsha video that I referenced before. So this is basically the way everybody looks at Navamsha. Always, Ketu is in Capricorn, and that's that. But here is where it's going to get interesting. So let's go back to the main chart and look at this Ketu in the Capricorn section. How far is it into that Capricorn section? Well, you could pretty much eyeball it and just see that it's pretty close to the end. So if every sign has 30 degrees, then it must be pretty close to 30 degrees of its Navamsha sign. Or you could do the math and find out that it's actually at 29 degrees. And now you have this crucial information about what degree Ketu occupies in Capricorn Navamsha. What do you do with that information? That's where the magic happens. What you do with that information is take the Navamsha planet and plot it back on the same chart as your main chart. Put it back on the same wheel that is your real chart. And that will show you whether it interacts with anything in your actual chart or not. That will show you if it's anywhere special in the Navamsha. So if it's not anywhere special, then it's not anything particularly special. But if it is someplace special, you'll know that because it lines up with something in the main chart. So let's put my Navamsha Ketu onto my main chart wheel and see what happens. It's at 29 degrees of Capricorn. That means it's right next to my real ascendant. So what we found out is that my Navamsha Ketu is very significantly influencing my ascendant. It's conjoined to my ascendant via the Navamsha. So that immediately alerts you right away as the reader of the chart that this Ketu is really important, that we're not going to be able to really accurately describe this person in our life without paying a lot of attention to Ketu. It's much more important than it looks in the main chart alone. And so if we didn't have this technique and you just go to read my chart, but if it was blind and you didn't know me, you might have a really hard time being able to really spot how much I live and breathe spirituality, astrology, esoteric, occult, day in and day out every day. But with this technique, the influence of Ketu, the planet that signifies such things, is so clear. Now I could show you dozens more examples of how awesomely this works, and probably that's what I'll be doing in future installments in this series. And don't forget, this technique doesn't just work with the Navamsha, it works with any subdivisional chart that has zodiac signs. So you can do it with the Saptamsha, Dashamsha, and so forth. But now, let's turn our attention to somebody that's not me, somebody that everybody knows, somebody you know even better than Jeffrey Dahmer is yourself. And I'm sure what you really want to know is not just Jeffrey Dahmer's astrology, but your own astrology. So you can go to my website, victorcara.com, click into the reports section, and order the Subdivisions module. That will give you all this information for your chart. In other words, how do all of your subdivisions interact with your main chart? And it will give you concise and clear interpretations of each important conjunction. So there'll probably be a link on the screen right now, or I'll put one in the description below so you can go over and get one of those reports. You would get it in a day or two. Okay, now let's move on to Dahmer and try to figure out his chart. The reason why I like to use his chart is because obviously he's a highly insane criminal. But honestly, this chart doesn't really show that. I mean, there are a couple of things here that we could point to and that could be supporting actors in the drama of a lunatic. But there really is no starring role here. And even the supporting actors are pretty ambiguous as to just how bad they are or not. So the reason why I wanted to use his chart to show how powerful this technique is because without this technique, you can't really figure him out at all. What Dahmer really lacks as an insane criminal is a certain trademark that extremely insane criminals tend to have, which is the conjunction of Rahu and Ketu to the moon or a debilitated Jupiter in very difficult circumstances. Just so you get a quick idea of what I'm talking about, have a quick look at Charles Manson, David Berkowitz, Adolf Hitler, who really is a criminal on the same scale or worse, Richard Ramirez, and Ted Bundy. They all have that signature of Rahu afflicting the moon and or Jupiter, and it's either in the 4th or the 10th house, in Ramirez's case the 5th, and that is the trademark of just having a very unstable mind. That's the main player that the supporting actors really amplify and turn into the full-on criminal. Dahmer's chart lacks that on the surface, but if we look at how the subcharts interface with the main chart, everything is going to become clear. So probably the first thing you'll notice in this overlay of his Navamsha to his main chart is that his debilitated Navamsha Jupiter is conjoined with his Navamsha Ketu, making that signature. And that conjunction is conjoined to his 4th house cusp. Not the Navamsha 4th house cusp, but the actual 4th house cusp of the main chart. So all of a sudden we see the signature that it was in all the other insane criminal charts of the Jupiter or moon debilitated or afflicted conjunction with Ketu or Rahu in the 4th house particularly. Additionally, in his case, we find the other benefic Venus is on the other side of this whole thing, getting afflicted by Rahu in a place that is exactly where his 10th house cusp is. So fully the signature of the insane criminal is the Rahu and Ketu effect very much on the 4th and 10th cusp. So here you find both in Dahmer's case via interfacing his Navamsha with his main chart, which you couldn't find without doing that and just looking at the main chart alone. A third thing that you find by doing this technique on Dahmer is that his Navamsha ascendant is conjoined to his natal Ketu, which is further alerting the reader that his Ketu is much more active than it looks from his main chart. Because in the main chart, it doesn't look that active or that deleterious. But after performing this technique on his chart, it looks classically criminal. As I mentioned earlier, this technique is in no way limited to the Navamsha. It's applicable for any zodiacal subdivision, in other words, any subdivision that uses zodiac signs. So let me just show you how his Dashamsha overlays over his main chart. In other words, we'll use the same technique on his Dashamsha. So first thing I want to bring to your attention, which you probably might know, it's not like it's hard to see this. This is giving us a whole new idea here about how lunar this person is, which by no means makes somebody a criminal. But don't forget, this is appearing in the context of everything else we already figured out about his chart. So how do you see how lunar this person is? Well, first of all, because the D10 moon exactly conjoins his actual ascendant, the main chart's ascendant. While at the same time, the Dashamsa's ascendant is extremely close to his natal moon. And don't forget the D10 is about your city or your perfection. So what he has perfected is this whole emotional realm, like this disjointed realm that he lives in, and also secrecy in the context of the rest of his stuff going on. What this lunar conjunction is showing in the Dashamsha is a person who has perfected privacy, or the ability to do things under the cover of night, the ability to do things unseen. It also shows that he has a fantastic imagination, but unfortunately, in the context of the rest of the chart, it's a fantastically grotesque or twisted imagination. But coming back to the main theme that we were looking at, the main signature of the criminal, we get another confirmation of that here using the technique on the Dashamsha, because we find that his Dashamsha Jupiter is very close to his natal Rahu and 12th house cusp. So see what that allows you to do interpretively. It allows you to locate his D10 Jupiter as conjoined to his Rahu in his 12th house. So what started out as kind of a mystery chart, like how does a person like this become that kind of a extremely grotesque, violent killer? That mystery is completely resolved by the information that this technique puts at our fingertips. And now we find his chart just as easy to read as of the other mega criminals like Manson and Berkowitz and so on. Of course, these kind of epic, legendary examples are quite interesting, but what really interests all of us is our own life. So what you're going to really find interesting about this technique is what it says about your chart. And the way to find that out is to order my report. I made a report all about this. It's the Subdivisions module of the basic reports. So you can get that by going to my site and clicking into the report section and just selecting that module and ordering it, and you'll get it within a day or two. So please do that. I'll put the link on the screen, put a link in the description below. Also, in the next installment in this series, we'll take a look at Donald Trump and what this technique helps us see about him as far as why this person is so incredibly lucky, why he seems to be able to get away with anything. So go get your report and stay tuned to the channel. Thank you.